What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actresses goes head-to-head with a late-night host who thinks he can push anyone around? Tonight we're diving into the explosive confrontation that left Jennifer Connelly walking off the Jimmy Kimmel live set. And trust me, what you're about to hear will shock you. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how power dynamics can completely destroy what should have been a simple promotional appearance. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story gets wild fast, and by the end you'll understand exactly why Jennifer had no choice but to make the statement she did. The tension was palpable from the moment Jennifer Connelly walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel live stage that evening. What was supposed to be a standard promotional interview for her latest film quickly devolved into something much more sinister. The warning signs were there from the very beginning, but nobody could have predicted just how badly things would spiral out of control. Jimmy, clearly feeling emboldened by his position of power and the comfort of his own studio, decided to take shots at Jennifer's career choices right from the opening question, setting the tone for what would become one of the most uncomfortable interviews in late-night television history. So Jennifer, I have to ask, after winning an Oscar for A Beautiful Mind, why did you choose to do so many, let's call them, forgettable films? Jimmy smirked as he delivered what he clearly thought was a clever jab, his eyes gleaming with the kind of malicious pleasure that comes from someone who believes they're untouchable. The audience's nervous laughter filled the uncomfortable silence that followed, but even they seemed to sense that something was off about the energy in the room. Jennifer's expression shifted immediately, her years of professional training the only thing keeping her composed in the face of such an unprovoked attack. Her professional smile faded as she processed not just the words, but the calculated cruelty behind them. This wasn't playful banter or even legitimate criticism. This was a deliberate attempt to diminish her accomplishments on national television. I'm sorry, Jimmy, but I think that's an incredibly reductive way to view an actress's career. Every role I've taken has been a deliberate choice based on the story being told, the character development opportunities, and the people I wanted to work with. Reducing an actor's body of work to whether or not it fits someone else's definition of memorable is frankly insulting. But Jimmy wasn't done, not by a long shot. He leaned back in his chair with that smug expression he's become known for, clearly enjoying the power dynamic he thought he'd established over someone who had achieved far more in her field than he ever had in his. The arrogance was breathtaking to witness. Come on, Jennifer, we both know some of those movies were just paychecks. I mean, Dark Water, House of Sand and Fog. These aren't exactly Citizen Kane. Let's be honest with our audience. Hear about what really drives these career choices. The audience grew quieter, sensing the shift in atmosphere from lighthearted late-night entertainment to something much more personal and nasty. Even the crew members visible in the background seemed uncomfortable with the direction Jimmy was taking things. Jennifer sat up straighter, her hands clasped firmly in her lap, her posture radiating the kind of controlled dignity that comes from years of dealing with industry nonsense. Jimmy, I'm here to talk about my current project, not to defend my entire filmography to someone who clearly hasn't done their homework and doesn't understand the nuances of building a sustainable career in this industry. Dark Water was a psychological thriller that explored themes of motherhood, guilt, and the lengths people go to protect their children. House of Sand and Fog dealt with immigration, the American dream, and the tragic consequences of bureaucratic failures. These are substantial films with important messages that resonated with audiences and critics alike. Jimmy chuckled dismissively, a sound that would become the catalyst for everything that followed, the moment when a bad interview became something much worse. Substantial? Jennifer, let's be honest with our audience here. You peaked early with that Oscar win and then spent years taking whatever scripts landed on your agent's desk. That's not artistry. That's just business. There's nothing wrong with admitting that sometimes actors take roles for the money rather than the art. The color drained from Jennifer's face, but not from embarrassment, from sheer anger at the audacity of what she was hearing. Here was a man who had built his career on cheap jokes, celebrity gossip, and the kind of mean-spirited humor that punches down rather than up, sitting across from an Academy Award winner and questioning her artistic integrity. The breathtaking arrogance of it was almost impressive in its completeness. This wasn't journalism. This wasn't even entertainment. This was just cruelty disguised as comedy. Jimmy, I think you're confusing me with someone who's going to sit here and let you disrespect my work and my choices for your amusement. Every actor in this business has to navigate the balance between commercial projects that pay the bills and artistic endeavors that feed the soul. The fact that you're reducing my career to sound bites for your show says more about your understanding of filmmaking and the entertainment industry than it does about my choices. Maybe instead of attacking your guests, you could try actually engaging with their work. But Jimmy doubled down, clearly thinking he was winning some kind of battle that only existed in his own mind. The ego driving his behavior was painful to watch, especially knowing how this would all end. Look, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You were the it girl for a hot minute after that Oscar, and then you kind of faded into the background. It happens to a lot of actresses, especially as they get older. Nothing personal, it's just the nature of the business. The nothing personal line was the final straw. The moment when Jennifer realized that this wasn't just poor interviewing, this was deliberate cruelty wrapped in false politeness. Her jaw tightened visibly, and those who knew her work could see the same intensity she brought to her most dramatic roles now focused entirely on the man sitting across from her. The interview had officially crossed the line from promotional appearance to personal attack, and everyone in the studio could feel the shift. Nothing personal? Jennifer's voice was steady but carried an edge that made even the camera operators take notice, the kind of controlled fury that's far more frightening than screaming or tears. Jimmy, you invited me on your show to promote my work, and instead you've spent the last 15 minutes attempting to tear down my career, question my artistic integrity, and suggest that my choices are somehow less valid than yours. That feels, pretty personal to me, and frankly, it's the kind of behavior I'd expect from someone who's never actually had to make the difficult choices that come with building a lasting career in this industry. The audience was now completely silent, the uncomfortable energy in the room so thick you could cut it with a knife. Even Jimmy seemed to realize he might have pushed too far, but his ego wouldn't let him back down or admit that he'd made a mistake. Instead of taking the graceful exit that any competent host would have recognized, he made the catastrophic decision that would define the rest of this confrontation and ultimately destroy any credibility he had left. Jimmy's response to Jennifer's legitimate frustration revealed the true depth of his arrogance and his complete inability to recognize when he'd crossed every possible line of professional conduct. Instead of acknowledging that he'd been inappropriate, instead of offering any kind of apology or course correction, he decided to gaslight her on national television in front of millions of viewers. Whoa, Jennifer. I think you're being a little sensitive here. This is comedy. This is what we do on late-night television. Can't you take a joke? I mean, we're all just having fun here? The "can't you take a joke" defense, the last refuge of bullies everywhere who get called out for their behavior, hung in the air like a toxic cloud. It was the kind of response that immediately revealed everything anyone needed to know about Jimmy's character and his complete lack of accountability. Jennifer's eyes narrowed as she processed not just the words, but the calculated manipulation behind them. Here was a man using his platform and his position of power to diminish her accomplishments, attack her career choices, and belittle her professional decisions, then hiding behind the comedy excuse when confronted with the consequences of his actions. A joke, Jimmy? Systematically attacking someone's life work, questioning their artistic integrity, and suggesting they've sold out isn't comedy, it's cruelty. And frankly, it's lazy comedy at that. Real comedians, talented comedians, find humor without punching. down at their guests or using their platform to make people feel small. What you're doing isn't entertainment. It's just mean-spirited bullying dressed up as late-night television. Jennifer's voice remained controlled and measured, but everyone in the studio could feel the fire behind her words. The years of experience, dealing with industry nonsense, finally reaching a breaking point. Jimmy's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger, the kind of reaction that comes from someone who's been called out publicly and doesn't have the emotional maturity to handle it gracefully. Being challenged by a guest, especially one who was supposed to be there for a simple promotional appearance, was clearly not part of his carefully crafted image as the cool, in-control host. He leaned forward aggressively, his voice taking on a more hostile tone that revealed just how thin his veneer of professionalism really was. "Listen, Jennifer, I've been doing this show for years. I know what works with audiences and what doesn't. Maybe if you weren't so defensive about your career choices, if you could actually develop a sense of humor about yourself, you could enjoy the experience instead of turning this into some kind of dramatic confrontation." The victim blaming was immediate and obvious to everyone watching, the kind of manipulative tactic that shifts responsibility from the aggressor to the target. Jimmy was now suggesting that Jennifer's reaction to his unprovoked attacks was the real problem, not his decision to ambush a guest with negativity and disrespect. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, the kind of behavior that reveals someone's true character when they're challenged, and Jennifer saw right through every word of it. Defensive. "Jimmy, you literally opened this interview by calling my work forgettable. You've questioned my artistic integrity, suggested I sold out for money, implied that my career peaked decades ago, and now you're telling me I'm too sensitive for not enjoying being insulted and attacked on your show. Do you hear yourself right now? Do you understand how completely inappropriate and unprofessional your behavior has been?" Jennifer's response was measured and logical, the kind of clear thinking that comes from someone who's had to deal with difficult personalities throughout their career. The audience began to murmur among themselves, the uncomfortable energy in the room becoming impossible to ignore. This wasn't the light-hearted celebrity banter they'd come to see. This wasn't the fun promotional interview they'd expected. This was uncomfortable, raw, and increasingly one-sided as Jimmy continued to dig himself deeper into a hole of his own, making seemingly incapable of recognizing when to stop. "Look, if you can't handle a little ribbing, if you can't take some honest criticism about your career choices, then maybe late-night television isn't for you," Jimmy shot back, his voice dripping with condescension and the kind of arrogance that comes from someone who's never had to face real consequences for their behavior. "We're not here to stroke your ego about every movie you've ever made or pretend that every choice you've made has been perfect. This is real talk, not some puff-piece interview." That comment was the breaking point, the moment when Jennifer realized that no amount of professionalism or patience was going to salvage this situation. Jimmy had just told an Academy Award-winning actress that she couldn't handle criticism, that she was too fragile for his show, that her decades of experience in one of the most challenging industries in the world somehow made her unqualified to sit across from him. The insult was so profound, so completely disconnected from reality, that it left her with no choice but to respond with action rather than words. Jennifer stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor in the sudden silence that followed. The action was so unexpected, so completely outside the normal parameters of a late-night talk show, that the cameras actually pulled back to capture the full moment. No guest had ever stood up during an active Jimmy Kimmel interview, certainly not in anger, certainly not in response to being treated with such blatant disrespect. "Jimmy, I came here tonight as a professional courtesy to promote my work and engage with your audience about something I'm passionate about. What I didn't come here for was to be your punching bag so you could feel better about yourself, to be the target of your insecurities about your own career, or to sit here while you attack my choices and then gaslight me for having the audacity to respond. The fact that you think attacking your guests is entertainment, that you believe making people feel small is comedy, says everything about who you are as a person and as a host. Jimmy's producer was frantically gesturing from the wings, clearly trying to signal for a commercial break, desperately attempting to salvage what was left of the show's reputation. But Jimmy was too caught up in his own ego, too invested in the power struggle he'd created, to notice the warning signs or take the graceful exit that was being offered to him. Instead of de-escalating, instead of recognizing that he'd made a terrible mistake, he made the catastrophic decision to challenge Jennifer further, to double down on behavior that was already completely indefensible. "Oh, so now I'm the bad guy because I didn't fawn over you like every other interviewer? Because I didn't treat you like some untouchable Hollywood royalty? Jennifer, this is how real interviews work in the real world. We ask tough questions and expect honest answers, not tantrums when someone doesn't worship at your feet." Jimmy's voice was getting louder, more aggressive, revealing just how completely he'd lost control of both the situation and himself. Calling her response a tantrum was the final insult, the moment when any pretense of professionalism completely evaporated. Jennifer had remained composed, articulate, and dignified throughout his attacks, responding to each insult with logic and grace, and now he was characterizing her legitimate anger as childish behavior. The disrespect was total and complete, the kind of behavior that reveals someone's true character when they think they have all the power. "Tough questions?" Jennifer's laugh was sharp and humorless, the sound of someone who had finally reached the end of their patience with behavior that would be unacceptable in any professional setting. "Jimmy, you haven't asked me a single question about my craft, my process, my experiences working with different directors, or even the film I'm here to promote. You've spent this entire time trying to tear me down for your own amusement, attacking my career choices, and questioning my integrity. That's not journalism. That's not entertainment. That's just sadism dressed up as late-night television." The word sadism hung in the air like a slap, a devastating assessment that cut right to the heart of Jimmy's behavior. Jimmy's face went from red to pale as he realized that Jennifer had just called him out not just as a bad interviewer, but as someone who derived pleasure from hurting others, someone whose idea of entertainment was making his guests feel small and worthless. "Now wait just a minute," Jimmy started, his voice cracking slightly as he finally began to understand the magnitude of what he'd created. But Jennifer was already removing her microphone, her movements deliberate and final. The universal signal that this nightmare was finally coming to an end. The sound of Jennifer's microphone hitting the coffee table between them was amplified through the studio speakers, creating a sharp crack that seemed to wake everyone up to what was actually happening in front of them. This wasn't a publicity stunt or a planned bit designed to generate buzz. This was a real person reaching their breaking point on live television, a moment of authentic human dignity standing up against systematic abuse disguised as entertainment. "I'm done," Jennifer announced, her voice carrying clearly across the stunned studio, each word deliberate and final. "Jimmy, I've been in this business for over 3 decades. I've worked with some of the most challenging directors and difficult personalities in Hollywood, and I have never, not once, been treated with such blatant disrespect by a host. You should be ashamed of yourself, and honestly, your audience deserves better than watching someone be torn down for your personal amusement." The audience sat in stunned silence, many of them clearly uncomfortable with what they'd witnessed, probably wondering if they'd somehow become complicit in something they never signed up to see. This wasn't the fun celebrity interview they'd expected when they got their tickets. This was something much darker and more personal, and even they could recognize that lines had been crossed that shouldn't have been. Jimmy, finally realizing that his show was imploding on live television, that his reputation was being destroyed in real time by his own behavior, made a desperate attempt to regain control and salvage something from the wreckage he'd created. "Jennifer, come on, sit. Back down. Let's work this out. We're all friends here. We're all just trying to put on a good show for the audience. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot." The audacity of calling them friends after spending 30 minutes systematically attacking her was breathtaking in its complete disconnection from reality. Jennifer turned to face him fully, and the camera caught every nuance of her expression, the same intensity and presence she'd brought to her most powerful dramatic moments. But this was real, raw, and completely unfiltered by script or direction. Friends? Jimmy, friends don't ambush each other with personal attacks disguised as interview questions. Friends don't use their platform to tear each other down for entertainment. Friends don't gaslight each other when called out for inappropriate behavior. What you've done tonight isn't friendship, it's abuse disguised as entertainment, and I will not be part of it for one more second. Your audience deserves hosts who can interview guests with respect and professionalism, not whatever this pathetic display has been. The word abuse hit the studio like a physical blow, the kind of assessment that immediately reframes everything that had come before it. Jimmy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as he struggled to formulate a response. His writers, his producers, his entire team having prepared him for promotional softball questions, not for a guest who would hold him accountable, for behavior that would be unacceptable in any professional setting. That's a pretty strong word, Jennifer. I think you might be overreacting just a little bit here. We're all just trying to have some fun, make some good television. Maybe you're taking this whole thing a bit too seriously, Jimmy managed to stammer, still completely unable to grasp the severity of what he'd created, or take responsibility for his role in destroying what should have been a simple promotional interview. Jennifer stopped walking toward the exit and turned back one final time, her decision to address his comment revealing just how important it was to her that the truth be spoken clearly and without ambiguity. The cameras followed her movement, and in that moment, she delivered what would become one of the most quoted responses in late-night television history, a masterclass in dignity and accountability that would be studied and referenced for years to come. Overreacting? Jimmy, you spent the first half of this interview systematically attacking my career choices, questioning my artistic integrity, and suggesting that my professional success was somehow invalid or accidental. Then you gaslit me when I called you out on your inappropriate behavior, telling me I was too sensitive to handle your comedy. Then you victim blamed me for not enjoying being insulted and attacked on your show. And now you're telling me I'm overreacting for refusing to sit here and take more abuse, while you continue to make excuses for behavior that would get you fired in any other professional setting. The only thing I'm overreacting to is how long it took me to stand up and walk away from this disaster you created. The logic was flawless, the delivery was perfect, and the impact was immediate and devastating. Even Jimmy's most loyal audience, members were nodding along with Jennifer's assessment, finally understanding that they'd witnessed something much more serious than a celebrity spat. She had just dismantled his entire approach in a single paragraph, exposing the calculated cruelty behind his behavior and the manipulative tactics he'd used to try to maintain control when confronted with the consequences of his actions. Jimmy made one last desperate attempt to save face, to somehow salvage his reputation from the complete destruction that was happening in real time. Jennifer, wait. Let's start over. Clean slate. Fresh beginning with clean questions about your new film, about your experiences in the industry. What do you say? Give me another chance to do this right. Jennifer paused at the edge of the stage area just before the curtain that led backstage, her hand resting on the fabric as she considered his words. For a moment it seemed like she might actually consider giving him another chance, that maybe her innate professionalism and years of industry experience might lead her to salvage something from this disaster. The audience held its collective breath, wondering if somehow this train wreck could be salvaged, if there was some way to undo the damage that had been done. Jimmy, the time for fresh starts was 30 minutes ago when I walked onto your stage. In good faith, ready to engage with you and your audience about work I'm passionate about. You chose to use that time to attack me, to question my choices, to make me feel small for your own entertainment. And now that you're facing the consequences of that decision, now that your behavior has been exposed for what it really is, you want to pretend it never happened? That's not how accountability works. That's not how respect works. And that's certainly not how I'm going to spend another second of my time. With that final statement, Jennifer Connelly walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a host who had just learned the hardest lesson of his career in the most public way possible. You can attack someone's work. You can question their choices. You can even try to embarrass them for your own amusement. But you cannot expect them to sit there and take it indefinitely. Jennifer had drawn a line in the sand, and Jimmy had crossed it so thoroughly, so completely, that there was no going back, no way to undo the damage he'd done to both his guest and his own reputation. The cameras stayed on Jimmy's face as he struggled to process what had just happened, the realization slowly dawning that he'd just destroyed his credibility in front of millions of viewers. His show, his reputation, and his ego had all taken a beating from a woman who refused to be anyone's victim, who had the strength and dignity to stand up for herself when no one else would. As the producer finally called for a commercial break, one thing was crystal clear. Jennifer Connelly had just schooled a bully on national television, and it was absolutely beautiful to watch. So what do you think? Was Jennifer right to walk off, or should she have stayed and tried to work it out? Did Jimmy cross lines that shouldn't be crossed, or was this just typical late-night television banter taken too seriously? Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments below, because I want to hear your thoughts on this incredible confrontation that exposed the ugly side of celebrity interviews.